Somewhere right now, two people are making decisions that will quietly shape each other's lives, and neither of them fully realizes it. A driver choosing whether to merge into traffic. A coworker deciding whether to share important information. A business owner setting a price that competitors will notice. These decisions seem ordinary, unremarkable, almost automatic. But beneath the surface of each one, something deeply strategic is happening. Something invisible to most people, yet operating every single day in every corner of human life. The strange truth is that human behavior, at its deepest level, follows hidden patterns. Patterns that researchers have spent decades studying, mapping, and attempting to understand. These patterns explain why people cooperate in some situations and sabotage each other in others. They explain why some agreements hold for centuries and others collapse overnight. And they reveal something extraordinary, that even the most instinctive, emotional human decisions are, in a very real sense, strategic, shaped by invisible incentives and invisible pressures most of us never consciously recognize. Imagine two strangers who have never met and will never meet again. Each holds a button. If both press it, they each walk away with a small reward. If neither presses it, nothing changes. But if only one person presses and the other does not, the one who pressed loses everything while the other gains a great deal. What would you do? Most people, left alone in that moment, would feel the pull of fear. And that fear, that single tremor of doubt, has echoed through human history, shaping wars, markets, friendships, and civilizations in ways that most people never see. This is the beginning of a very long story, a story that science has been piecing together across biology, mathematics, psychology, and economics. It is a story not about numbers or formulas, but about people. About the quiet forces that push us toward each other and the equally quiet forces that pull us apart. About why the world is the way it is, and how, with the right lens, you can begin to see the hidden architecture of human behavior that surrounds you every single day. For most of recorded history, human behavior was explained through stories, myths, morals, religious teachings. The idea that behavior could follow mathematical patterns felt cold, even insulting to many. But in the mid-20th century, something changed. Researchers began noticing that certain situations, from animal conflicts to international negotiations, seemed to produce eerily predictable outcomes regardless of culture, language, or geography. The behavior was different on the surface, but identical in its structure. Something deeper was at work. In the 1940s and 1950s, a young mathematician named John Nash began formalizing what he called the theory of strategy, what we now call game theory. Nash discovered that in any situation where two or more decision-makers interact, there often exists a kind of equilibrium, a point where no individual can improve their outcome by changing their behavior alone, because everyone else is already responding optimally to everyone else. This idea, the Nash equilibrium, wasn't just an abstract mathematical curiosity. It described something real about how humans and animals and even institutions tend to settle into stable patterns of behavior. The power of this discovery was not that it described perfect rationality. It was that it revealed the hidden logic even behind irrational-seeming choices. When you understand the structure of a situation, the payoffs, the risks, the number of players, you can often predict how people will behave without knowing a single thing about their personality, background, or intentions. The rules aren't written anywhere. They are emergent. They arise naturally from the structure of interaction itself, as inevitably as water flowing downhill. Because if human behavior follows hidden rules, if strategy is embedded in the fabric of everyday life, then understanding those rules means understanding something fundamental about what it means to be human. It means seeing the invisible architecture that shapes decisions in boardrooms and bedrooms, in negotiations and friendships, in wars and simple acts of kindness. And once you begin to see it, you cannot unsee it. Here is a question that puzzled evolutionary biologists for decades. Why do humans cooperate at all? From a purely selfish standpoint, cooperation seems irrational. Sharing resources, helping strangers, honoring agreements when no one is watching. These behaviors cost something. Time, energy, resources. And yet human civilization is built almost entirely on cooperation. We cooperate on scales that no other species approaches, building institutions, cities, economies, legal systems, all resting on the remarkable ability of strangers to trust and work with other strangers. In the 1980s, a political scientist named Robert Axelrod ran an extraordinary experiment. He invited experts from around the world, economists, mathematicians, psychologists, biologists, to submit computer programs that would compete in a simple repeated game. Each program would repeatedly choose to either cooperate or defect against another program. If both cooperated, both earned moderate rewards. If one defected while the other cooperated, the defector won big while the cooperator lost. If both defected, both earned very little. The question was, what strategy wins over time? The answer stunned many people. The winning strategy was also the simplest one submitted, a program called tit for tat. It cooperated on the first move, then simply did whatever the other program had done on the previous move. Cooperate with cooperators. Punish defectors immediately, but forgive quickly and return to cooperation if the other side does. This elegant strategy outperformed every complex, sophisticated approach in the tournament. It was nice, retaliatory, forgiving, and clear. And it revealed something profound, that in a world of repeated interactions, genuine cooperation is not just morally appealing. It is strategically superior. What Axelrod's work showed was that cooperation does not require trust, altruism, or even goodwill. It can emerge naturally when the same players interact repeatedly and when the future matters enough. When people expect to deal with each other again, when the shadow of the future is long, the logic of cooperation becomes overwhelming, even for purely self-interested actors. The game changes entirely. Cheating someone once is no longer worth it if it means losing a beneficial relationship forever. And this insight, simple as it sounds, explains an astonishing amount of human social behavior. Not all competition is productive. In fact, one of the most unsettling findings in the study of strategic behavior is how easily rational individuals can trap themselves in situations where everyone loses, not through stupidity or malice, but simply because the structure of their interaction makes cooperation nearly impossible. These traps have a name. Researchers call them social dilemmas, and they appear everywhere from international politics to neighborhood disputes to corporate rivalries that slowly drain all parties involved. Think about two neighboring coffee shops on the same street. Each decides, independently, whether to run a promotional discount. If neither runs a discount, both earn solid profits. The neighborhood supports both businesses comfortably. But if one runs a discount and the other does not, the discounting shop steals most of the customers, leaving the other struggling. So both decide they must offer discounts to protect themselves. Now both are losing margin, both are working harder, and both are earning less than they would have if neither had discounted at all. They are trapped in a structure that punishes cooperation and rewards aggression, even though aggression hurts everyone. This pattern, known as the prisoner's dilemma, is one of the most studied situations in all of social science. It explains price wars that ruin entire industries, arms races between nations that leave both sides poorer and no safer than before, environmental crises where each individual actor pollutes just a little because the cost of restraint falls on them alone while the benefit is shared with everyone. The competition is rational from each individual's perspective and irrational from the perspective of the group. Logic at the individual level produces catastrophe at the collective level. The tragedy deepens when you realize that the people caught in these traps often know exactly what is happening. Business executives watch their competitors and know the price war is destroying the market. Politicians understand that the arms buildup is economically unsustainable. Fishermen know the waters are being depleted, and yet the incentives pull them forward anyway, because the cost of unilateral restraint is simply too high. Breaking out of these traps requires something more than individual willpower. It requires changing the game itself, altering the rules, the incentives, or the structure of interaction in ways that make cooperation the rational choice rather than the costly one. There is one force that changes the strategic landscape more powerfully than almost any other: reputation. In a world of one-time interactions, selfishness is cheap. You can cheat a stranger you will never see again and walk away with the benefit at no cost. But humans do not live in a world of one-time interactions. We live in networks, webs of overlapping relationships where information travels fast and memory is long. In this kind of world, reputation becomes perhaps the most valuable strategic asset a person can build. The research on this is striking. Studies consistently show that people behave more cooperatively and honestly when they believe they are being observed, or even when they merely feel as though they might be observed. In one famous experiment, researchers placed an image of eyes above an office honesty box where people voluntarily paid for coffee and tea. Simply adding the image of eyes, not real surveillance, just a picture, more than doubled the amount of money people contributed. The feeling of being watched activated something deep in our social psychology. Reputation management runs so deeply in us that even its symbol triggers it. This is not merely a modern phenomenon. Anthropologists studying traditional societies around the world consistently find that reputation is one of the most powerful currencies in any community. Being known as trustworthy, generous, and reliable opens doors, secures alliances, and creates opportunities that no amount of short-term cunning can match. The individual who cooperates reliably even when they could get away with defecting is not being naive. They are making a long-term strategic investment that pays dividends across hundreds of future interactions with dozens of future partners. What makes reputation so powerful is that it works even across relationships between people who have never directly interacted. Your reputation precedes you. It travels through the network before you arrive. When a researcher named Manfred Malinsky studied cooperation in human groups, he found that individuals who had been seen cooperating publicly received more cooperation from others in future rounds, even from people who had never played with them directly. Reputation creates a kind of social credit that compounds over time, reshaping the strategic environment in the favor of those who invest in it carefully and consistently. There is something that economics long struggled to explain. Why do humans care so deeply about fairness? A purely rational, self-interested actor should not care whether a deal is fair, only whether it is profitable. If someone offers you $1 for doing nothing, you should take it. It is more than you had before. And yet human beings routinely reject such offers when they feel the arrangement is unfair, even when rejecting costs them real money. They will pay a price to punish unfairness, which makes no sense in a traditional model of economic rationality. And yet it is one of the most robustly replicated findings in all of behavioral science. The experiment that demonstrated this most clearly is called the ultimatum game. Two players are given a sum of money. One player proposes how to split it. The other player can accept, and both get their shares, or reject, and both get nothing. A purely rational second player should always accept, because something is better than nothing. But in study after study, across dozens of cultures and thousands of participants, players consistently reject offers they perceive as insulting, typically anything below about 30% of the total. They would rather punish the unfair proposer than accept a reward that feels degrading. Daniel Kahneman, one of the founders of behavioral economics, helped illuminate why this happens. Humans do not evaluate outcomes in absolute terms. We evaluate them relative to a reference point, what we expect, what seems fair, what comparable others receive. A salary of $60,000 feels like a gain if you expected $50,000 and a loss if you expected $70,000. The psychological reality of a situation is often more powerful than its material reality. And fairness norms, the deep social intuitions about what distributions of rewards and burdens are acceptable, function as one of the most important reference points in human psychology. This deep sensitivity to fairness is not a bug in human cognition. It is a feature. In a world of repeated interactions and complex social networks, the ability to recognize and punish unfair dealing is extraordinarily valuable. It protects against exploitation. It signals to potential partners that you are not someone to be taken advantage of, and it enforces social norms in the absence of formal legal systems. Long before there were courts and contracts, communities maintained cooperation through the powerful human instinct to reward fair dealing and punish those who violated it, even at personal cost. One of the most fascinating and counterintuitive findings in the study of human cooperation is the existence of what researchers call altruistic punishment. This is the behavior of punishing someone who cheats or defects, even when the punishment costs you something and you gain no direct material benefit from delivering it. From a narrow self-interest perspective, this makes no sense at all. Why spend your own resources to enforce a norm that benefits the whole group? Why not let someone else do the punishing while you free ride on their efforts? And yet humans do this constantly, across cultures and contexts, driven by something that feels almost like moral outrage. Researchers at the University of Zurich gave participants money and had them watch a cooperation game. When they observed others defecting, cheating on an agreement, participants were willing to spend their own money to reduce the cheater's earnings. There was no benefit to them. The cheater was a stranger. The interaction was anonymous. And yet the punishment was swift and near universal. Brain imaging studies have added a remarkable detail. The brain regions associated with satisfaction and reward light up when people successfully punish norm violators. Punishing cheaters feels good at a neurological level. We are wired for it. The strategic importance of this instinct becomes clear when you consider what would happen without it. If cheaters faced no consequences, if the only cost of defection was the loss of a single cooperative partner, then the temptation to defect would be overwhelming in almost every situation. Social cooperation would be fragile and easily exploited. But the existence of altruistic punishment changes the calculus entirely. Now the potential cheater must weigh the gain from defection against the possibility of punishment not just from their direct partner, but from third parties observers, community members, anyone who witnesses the violation and feels the pull of justice. This is why large-scale human cooperation is possible at all. Not because humans are naturally angels. We are capable of tremendous cruelty and selfishness, but because we carry within us a deep sensitivity to unfairness and a powerful drive to sanction those who violate cooperative norms. These tendencies evolved because groups that had them outcompete groups that did not. The individuals within those groups who enforced norms, even at personal cost, were maintaining the conditions that allowed the group to function at a high level, and the group, in turn, provided them with the benefits of collective action. The punishment is altruistic, but it serves a deeply strategic purpose. There is a moment in almost every significant human relationship when one person must extend something before they know whether it will be returned. A business partner signs a contract before the other has delivered. A friend shares a secret before they know how it will be held. A nation agrees to limit its weapons before confirming whether the other side has done the same. These moments are the architecture of trust, and they are far more strategic than they appear. Trust is not merely a feeling. It is a calculated risk, shaped by everything we know and everything we cannot know about another person. Economists and game theorists have studied trust extensively and found something both reassuring and sobering. Trust tends to build through small, incremental risks. Two strangers negotiating a deal rarely hand over large sums immediately. They start with small commitments, a handshake agreement, a modest deposit, a low-stakes collaboration. Each completed exchange builds a thin layer of confidence. Over time, those layers accumulate into something robust. The mechanism here is called signaling, and it works because actions that cost something to take, time, money, vulnerability, carry more credibility than words alone. This is why reputation matters so profoundly in repeated social and economic life. A person or organization that has consistently honored commitments over years carries an implicit trust premium that is genuinely valuable. It lowers the cost of every future negotiation because the other party does not need to hedge as heavily against betrayal. Conversely, a single significant breach, a public deception, a betrayal of confidence, can destroy what took years to build because it updates everyone's estimate of the person's reliability dramatically and permanently. The strategy of trust also reveals why distrust can be so costly. When two parties both doubt each other's intentions, they invest heavily in monitoring, verification, and protection against defection. These are resources that could have been used for something productive. An entire industry of lawyers, auditors, and compliance officers exists largely because trust between strangers is uncertain. This is not a criticism. Uncertainty is real, and these mechanisms are often necessary. But it illustrates how much human energy is consumed by the problem of credibility, and how much is saved when it is established. The question of how trust gets broken, then, is not just philosophical. It is intensely practical. There is a common assumption embedded in much of economics and game theory that humans are rational, that given a clear set of options, clear information, and clear payoffs, people will consistently choose the option that maximizes their benefit. This assumption has been enormously productive as a scientific tool, but it is also, in important ways, incomplete, because humans are not calculating machines. We are emotional, social, historically shaped creatures who think in stories and symbols as much as in numbers, and our decisions are systematically influenced by factors that pure logic would dismiss as irrelevant. Daniel Kahneman spent decades documenting the gap between how humans actually make decisions and how a rational model would predict. His findings revealed a mind divided, a fast, intuitive system that makes snap judgments based on emotion, pattern recognition, and heuristics, and a slow, deliberate system capable of careful analysis, but easily overridden by the fast one. The result is a catalog of predictable, systematic errors. We respond to the framing of a choice as much as its substance. Identical options presented as gains or losses produce dramatically different decisions. We overweight vivid, recent information and underweight statistical base rates. We are loss-averse in ways that distort our calculations of risk. These tendencies are not random noise. They have their own patterns and predictability. And in strategic situations, they create opportunities and vulnerabilities that purely rational models miss entirely. A negotiator who understands loss aversion knows that framing a concession as the avoidance of a loss is more powerful than framing the same concession as a gain. A product designer who understands that people evaluate options relative to reference points can engineer those reference points to guide choices in predictable directions. The psychology of decision-making is not separate from strategy. It is part of the game itself. What is perhaps most humbling about this research is the discovery that awareness does not always protect us. Knowing about cognitive biases does not automatically neutralize them. The fast intuitive system continues to generate its reactions before the slow deliberate system can intervene. Experts show the same biases as novices in many contexts. Intelligent people make systematically irrational choices. This is not a reason for despair. It is a reason for humility, for building decision environments that account for human psychology rather than assuming it away, and for recognizing that even the most careful strategist is working with a mind that did not evolve for boardrooms and balance sheets, but for the grasslands of a very different world. The games of strategy that researchers study in laboratories are not confined to laboratories. They are running constantly, in every conversation, every negotiation, every relationship. When you decide whether to bring up a difficult topic with a friend, you are playing a coordination game, trying to find the move that leads to a better shared outcome without disrupting the equilibrium of trust between you. When you bargain over the price of a car or a contract, you are navigating a negotiation with imperfect information, strategic signaling, and the possibility of breakdown. When you decide how much effort to contribute to a group project, you are in a public goods game, a small version of every collective action problem humanity has ever faced. Consider something as ordinary as driving in traffic. Every driver is simultaneously cooperating and competing, maintaining safe following distances, yielding at merges, deciding when to push through a yellow light. The entire system works only because most drivers follow unwritten norms most of the time. When those norms break down, when too many drivers cut in line or run red lights, the system degrades rapidly. The efficiency of traffic is not determined by individual skill or road quality alone. It is determined by the cooperation level of the group, which is itself shaped by norms, enforcement, and the mutual expectation that others will follow the rules. Family dynamics are equally rich with strategic complexity. Siblings negotiate implicitly over parental attention, household resources, and family roles. Parents and children play long games of commitment and credibility, each side testing whether the other's threats and promises mean what they claim to mean. Couples manage the difficult balance between individual autonomy and collective investment, between the vulnerability that deep intimacy requires and the self-protective instincts that past experience has installed. None of these negotiations are consciously strategic. They feel entirely personal, emotional, immediate. But the underlying structure, the payoffs, the information asymmetries, the credibility problems, is remarkably similar to the formal models that researchers study with great precision. Recognizing these games does not make them cold or mechanical. It makes them more legible. When a friend withdraws after a conflict, it is easier to respond constructively if you understand that they may be protecting themselves from what feels like an unfair equilibrium, rather than simply being cruel or indifferent. When a negotiation stalls, it helps to ask what each party's reference point is, what their outside options are, and what it would take to restructure the situation so that agreement is more attractive than impasse. Strategic thinking, applied to personal life, is not the enemy of warmth and connection. It is a tool for understanding the hidden architecture of the situations in which warmth and connection either flourish or fail. There is a peculiar feature of human decision-making that becomes obvious once you notice it. We copy each other constantly, not just in fashion or speech, but in our deepest choices: what careers to pursue, what values to hold, what risks to take, what to believe about the world. Social scientists call this social learning, and it is one of the most powerful engines of human culture, for better and for worse. In an uncertain world, where gathering and processing all relevant information directly is impossible, copying successful others is an entirely rational strategy. But it also creates the conditions for cascades, moments when individual behavior tips suddenly and dramatically, not because the underlying facts have changed, but because the perceived behavior of the group has shifted. The mechanism is deceptively simple. Imagine a line of people outside a restaurant. You are hungry and do not know the city. You see 20 people waiting. You join the line. Others behind you see 21 people waiting. They join. The line grows not because the food was ever verified to be good, but because each person rationally inferred quality from the apparent choices of others. This is an information cascade, a situation in which rational individuals making reasonable inferences from social signals converge on the same behavior even when the initial signal may have been misleading or random. Financial bubbles, fashion trends, political movements, and cultural panics all have this shape at their core. The evolutionary logic runs deep. Humans are distinguished from other animals partly by the sophistication with which we transmit learned knowledge across generations. We do not need to personally experience every predator, every toxic plant, every dangerous social pattern. We inherit the accumulated wisdom of our communities through observation and imitation. This is the engine of cumulative culture, the mechanism that allowed humans to build up knowledge across generations rather than starting fresh with each one. But the same mechanism that makes cultural transmission possible also makes us susceptible to inheriting beliefs and practices that were adaptive in past environments but are poorly suited to present ones. The strategic implication is double-edged. On one side, the tendency to copy others makes social behavior highly susceptible to influence at critical early moments. The first movers who establish a behavior as the norm exercise an influence wildly disproportionate to their numbers. On the other side, being aware of this tendency gives individuals a tool for critical self-examination. When you find yourself conforming to a social norm, it is worth asking whether you have actually evaluated the underlying logic, or whether you are simply reflecting the behavior of those around you. The capacity to copy is one of humanity's greatest strengths. The capacity to pause and ask why you are copying is one of its rarest. There is a variable that changes everything in strategic interaction: time horizon. How far into the future do the players think? How much does the next interaction matter compared to this one? Research consistently shows that individuals, institutions, and even entire cultures that extend their planning horizons, that weigh future consequences heavily in present decisions, achieve fundamentally different strategic outcomes than those focused primarily on immediate payoffs. The difference is not merely one of willpower or self-control. It is a structural feature that reshapes the entire strategic landscape. The classic demonstration of this involves what researchers call the shadow of the future, the degree to which future interactions are expected and valued. Robert Axelrod's work on cooperation showed that the most critical variable in determining whether cooperation could emerge was not the nature of the players or even the specific payoffs. It was whether the players expected to interact again. When the probability of future interaction was high, cooperation could sustain itself through reciprocity and reputation. When it was low, when players did not expect to see each other again, the rational move shifted dramatically toward exploitation. Patience is not just a virtue. It is a structural condition that makes cooperation viable. In business, this plays out in the tension between quarterly earnings pressure and long-term investment. Companies that orient entirely around short-term results often hollow out the capabilities, the human capital, the research pipelines, the customer relationships that generate long-term value. Competitors with longer time horizons can patiently invest in capabilities that will not pay off for years, accepting short-term disadvantage in exchange for long-term dominance. The same logic applies in national policy, in environmental stewardship, and in personal relationships. The party with the longer time horizon consistently holds a deeper kind of strategic power, the power to wait, to invest, to build, while those around them are optimizing for the next quarter. The philosopher Derek Parfit spent much of his career arguing that we systematically discount the future in ways that are difficult to justify rationally, that the mere temporal distance of an outcome does not actually reduce its importance, even though our psychology treats it as if it does. Whether or not one accepts his philosophical argument, the empirical pattern is clear. The individuals and institutions that find ways to extend their effective time horizon through habit, culture, incentive design, or deliberate practice, consistently achieve outcomes that would have been inaccessible to their more impatient counterparts. The advantage of patience is one of the most dependable edges in the entire landscape of human strategy. Thinking strategically does not mean being cold, calculating, or manipulative. It means developing a kind of structural empathy, the ability to see a situation from inside another person's decision-making logic. Before you can anticipate what someone else will do, you need to understand what they want, what they fear, what constraints they operate under, and what social games they are playing. This is not cynicism. It is careful attention. And it is one of the most consistently useful cognitive skills a person can develop, whether they are negotiating a contract, navigating a difficult relationship, designing a policy, or simply trying to understand why a situation keeps going in a direction no one intended. One of the most practical tools from game theory is the habit of tracing incentives before assuming intent. When someone behaves in a way that seems inexplicable or frustrating, ask what incentive structure they might be responding to. The hospital administrator who seems to prioritize paperwork over patients may be responding to a metric system that rewards documentation. The politician who takes a position that seems obviously counterproductive may be responding to the incentives of a primary election rather than a general one. Understanding the game someone is playing, even when they themselves have not examined it consciously, makes their behavior far more legible. Equally important is learning to distinguish between situations where competition serves you and situations where cooperation would serve you better. Many people default to competitive framing even in contexts where collaboration would produce a larger total outcome for everyone involved. The negotiation that is treated as a zero-sum battle over a fixed pie is sometimes actually an opportunity to expand the pie entirely, to discover that the two parties want different things from the deal, and that an agreement can give each of them more than they would get from a fight. The art of strategic thinking is knowing which kind of game you are actually in, rather than assuming it matches the one you are used to. In the end, the deepest insight from all of this may be the simplest one. Life is structured by games, not because it is trivial or meaningless, but because wherever there are multiple people with their own interests and limited information about each other, the logic of strategic interaction inevitably takes hold. Recognizing this does not make you a cynic. It makes you a more compassionate and more effective participant in the world. When you understand that another person's behavior is shaped by incentives they may not have chosen and games they may not have designed, frustration can give way to curiosity. And curiosity, more often than not, is the beginning of every genuinely useful thing. We have traveled through a great deal of territory together, through laboratories where strangers made decisions with real stakes, through evolutionary history where cooperation emerged from the cold logic of mutual benefit, through the psychology of fairness and the mathematics of equilibrium. What ties all of it together is a single underlying insight, that human behavior is not random. It is not simply the sum of individual personalities and moods. It is shaped, powerfully, systematically, predictably, by the invisible structure of the situations people find themselves in. The rules of the game matter as much as the players. This insight has a kind of liberating power. When you see a conflict, in a workplace, in a family, in a community, in international affairs, the reflexive response is often to look for who is to blame. Who is being selfish, irrational, difficult, cruel? And sometimes that analysis is correct. But more often, the deeper explanation lies in the structure of the situation. People are responding rationally, or at least predictably, to the incentives and constraints they face. The path to resolving the conflict lies not in changing the people, but in changing the game, altering the payoffs, the information flows, the time horizons, the commitment mechanisms that are producing the conflict as a nearly inevitable output. There is also a personal dimension to this understanding. You are playing these games too, every day, in every interaction, in every choice about how to present yourself, how to invest your time, how to build and maintain relationships and reputation. The question is not whether to play, because the game is always running whether you recognize it or not. The question is whether to play with awareness. Whether to see the structure of the situations you inhabit clearly enough to navigate them with purpose rather than simply reacting to whatever surface pressures are most immediately visible. The examine game is not a cynical game. It is a more generous and more effective one. Look around you at the ordinary texture of a single day, at the traffic you navigate, the colleagues you negotiate with, the news you interpret, the relationships you tend. Underneath all of it, invisible as gravity, the patterns are running. People estimating each other's intentions, reputations being built and spent, trust being extended and sometimes betrayed and slowly rebuilt. The structure of cooperation and competition shaping outcomes that seem, from the inside, entirely personal and unique, but that follow, from the outside, patterns as regular as tides. This is the hidden game. It has no referee, no scoreboard, no final whistle. It runs as long as human beings share a world, which is to say, it runs forever. And the first step toward playing it well is simply to see it.